Well, this is New York City Friends of Clearwater Incorporated Environmental Education Show, and I have three distinguished guests here. I have Donna Stein, Vice President of New York City Friends of Clearwater. I have Top Katz, or Talbot Katz, former President of New York City Friends of Clearwater, now a Secretary of New York City Friends of Clearwater, and a recent father. And I have Fred Berg, civil rights and tenant attorney and environmental activist. And we were talking before about activism and organizing, and your masterful involvement organizing the Water Festival this past June, Donna. So what can you tell us about organizing and activism in your experience and in your experience with New York City Friends of Clearwater?
Well, probably helping put together the Water Festival was how I originally started getting involved with New York City Friends of Clearwater. My friend Wave came to me, who was doing the music for the show, and asked me if I would organize it, because I do events, and I have a history of activism, and I love the water. I'm definitely a water person. I'm a kayaker, and nobody gets closer to the Hudson River than a kayaker. When I got involved in the Water Festival, I saw that there was a need to follow the vision of the past president, who the Water Festival was dedicated to, Carl Schwartz, who wanted to bring the idea of New York City Friends of Clearwater, which was all about education, combined with Clearwater's overall feeling of community and bringing entertainment and music and the activism of that aspect of our lives together with the education. So I put together a show with as many different environmental organizations as I could find, and we interspersed the speakers with the music, and I think the show came off pretty well.
You touched upon a very important point. You were focused on education, and you used environmental educators and speakers and great musicians. Can you tell us who impressed you as an educator and who impressed you as a musician?
For that, I would like to have my program in front of me and reading it in front. We had people who were filmmakers. Pamela Timmons, who making a video of about the Clearwater, and Pete Seeger. We had Rage of Nature, Josh Fox. Several people wanted to speak about the fracking issue, which we touched upon in the last show. It's such an important and current topic that we're working on, but it's of course only one of many focuses for us for the environment. There's from Urban Divers, which is an organization in Long Island City that speaks about the pollution, different programs that they're doing for the environment in the East River. There was many, I'm sorry.
Well, thank you,
May I ask what type of communication means did you use to both solicit people to attend and sign up, as well as the various people who provided education materials, and then how was it disseminated afterwards? I remember I very much enjoyed attending the event, and I really benefited from that. But I was curious as to how people seemed to congregate at certain periods of time. They were like it was really very interesting how it came off. And then I noticed people taking away either handwritten information, or a lot of people seemed to have a lot of notes that they took, which I think were a lot of internet addresses, websites and other things. It was a very interesting mosaic, it seemed, of different communications, handouts, both people signed up through a website that I couldn't find at all when I tried, but it was I thought it was like overall I was very satisfied with it. but I was amazed at how many different ways people had found out about it and how they, times they came for whether it was an educational or musical performance or even just to meet up with other, colleagues and friends, who are interested in environmental justice and committed to it, to make sure that messages get out, word gets out, and that people are inspired to, help others.
Well, you just described networking, and and that's what we're all about. We just network to all the people we know. There's some wonderful resources in the Friends of Clearwater. I like to say I'm new to the party, and just coming into this organization, not the first organization I've been involved in, but the first organization I'm early into this one, and wealth of information. Talbot, Ken Gale with WBAI Radio and Friends of Clearwater as well. There was plenty of people to ask. I said, who can I call? Who do you know? Who's a good speaker? I had been to a Sierra Club event with Jonathan, where I first learned about fracking, and got a number of names from that event, and they were got them to speak. So it's just about networking.
Yeah.
And I'm very glad that you got that.
Honestly, quite honestly, it was inspirational to get to network, to get a networking
We
experience
all-
like that, and I was able
we
to
all
draw
happy
on
to
it
hear
in the
that.
future. And since then I've had incredible exposure and other types of interactions, with people that I found, both enlightening and motivating me to do more.
Yeah, I would say that though.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Fred. I brought Talbot on the show because Talbot has an amazing record of 20 years activism in this great organization, this organization which we want to keep growing. We want people to be concerned about the air and the water for sustainability and life itself. And in those 20 years, what can you tell us were some of the major victories and some of the major involvements that you were participated in and led?
Thank you, Jonathan. To call me an activist is setting the bar kind of low, but I'm proud to be a member of Friends of Clearwater and the statewide organization Clearwater. I wanted to say that the Water Festival was a great example of what we're all about. Clearwater is kind of a unique organization, and what we do is we use celebration, education, and advocacy as kind of they call a three-legged stool. Ultimately the goal of Clearwater is to improve our environment. Many people know, certainly everyone here knows, and some people don't know, that Clearwater is actually a boat. There's the Hudson River sloop Clearwater. It's a replica of one of the 19th century sloops that used to sail up and down the Hudson. And it was launched about a little more than 40 years ago with the mission of helping to educate people to clean up the river, and has done really a spectacular job. Still today takes school kids out on a regular basis to actually have a first-hand experience of sailing on the river, learning about the ecology of the river. So it's a wonderful teaching tool. It's a wonderful advocacy tool because it's so recognizable. You see that boat out there and you know what it's about, and it's about cleaning up the water, cleaning up the environment. And the celebration part of it, well, of course, that's because Pete Seeger was the kind of guiding light of the organization. And wherever Pete Seeger is, there's going to be music. So those principles, Donna and Phil Sowers, who was another one of the people who helped put the Water Festival in action, drew on that to put together a festival that used all those three things: the education, the celebration, the advocacy. And that's the kind of thing that we've been doing, ever since I've been involved. I really haven't been involved with the organization for 20 years, although the person who got me in was of course, Carl Schwartz, our sainted former leader, a wonderful person who I owe so much to. And I've known him, I knew him for more than 25 years. And he was always involved with Clearwater through all that time. So he was always telling me about Clearwater. I'd known about Clearwater since I was in high school because a friend of mine was a volunteer crew member all the way back then, back in the 70s. So it was something I'd always known about. I'd been a member, but not really an active member. But then Carl drove me into the organization more like 15 years ago. But the kinds of things that I worked with other groups that worked with Clearwater even back in the 80s. So some of the issues that we worked on, as far back as the 80s was, well, there was always the PCBs in the river. So that's been a big problem in the Hudson River, from way, way back. GE, of course, was the biggest annoyance. they were the biggest violator of really, pouring PCBs into the river, as it was part of their industrial process. Maybe back then people didn't know the damage that they would do. But then once it was known, they didn't really want to clean up their act. And so Clearwater was one of the groups that pressed on this issue for a long time, and finally, got so that there would be dredging. And I believe the dredging is going on now, although I don't know the exact status of that. So PCBs was one issue. Westway was a big issue back in the 80s. So they wanted to build this big super highway. I think that really went back to the time of Robert Moses that they wanted to do that. And Clearwater was one of the groups that was really, and New York City Friends of Clearwater was very much interested in the whole West Side waterfront and fighting Westway. So we were active in that. Another issue that we were active in the early 90s, and when Carl first really pulled me into the organization, was about energy and about James Bay. So that was James Bay is an area actually up in Canada, and the Canadian power company Hydro-Quebec wanted to really ruin James Bay, so that they could generate a lot of power and sell it to New York State, and it was going to upset the ecology, of course, up there, and the homelands of the Cree and the Inuit who lived up there. So there were a lot of groups working together to see if we could keep that from happening, and that was a big victory that the New York City Friends of Clearwater participated in back in the early 90s. And then that led, it was one thing led to another. So of course, water has always been a focus. So particularly the drinking water of New York City. As you've mentioned already, there are two main sources, the Catskill Delaware and the Croton. And in the mid-90s, there was talk about filtering those two water systems. And the Catskill Delaware is the bigger one. And we were able to be part of a coalition that successfully fought filtration, because it's much better if you can have naturally protected clean water. And so we got a filtration avoidance agreement, and that's still in force for the Catskill Delaware. We were not able to do the same thing for Croton, and unfortunately they are building a filtration plant for Croton, although we're still trying to limit the damage as much as possible by trying to see if we can get area around the Croton watershed bought up by New York City so that there's not more development that takes place there. So those are the kinds of issues. Of course, as we've mentioned a lot, one of the big issues that's also about drinking water and about New York City's drinking water, although it's not taking place directly in New York City, is the gas drilling in the Marcellus Shale region. And as we like to say, it's not all it's fracked up to be.
You touched upon some major issues today, and you touched upon Pete Seeger, the creator of this organization. And I agree with you. He's a brilliant musician, and he's a great educator. He's also a protest singer. And there's a lot to be protested about, even with the Democrats today. Number one, the fracking issue. But number two, more importantly, one of the other key issues has been nuclear power. And it occurs to me that the water issue was or the fracking water issue was derived from a company that was, really not in focus. Yes, they're focused on energy, and the former vice president was connected with them, but they don't really seem to be focused on people. Could you tell us who invented fracking, if you know, and also about the Indian Point issue?
Well, I don't know exactly who invented fracking. My understanding is that it goes back actually to just after World War II.
And the engineering or mechanical type of.
Yeah, well, so it stands for
Right.
hydraulic fracturing, and
Right.
they take a mixture of various different elements that they kind of force down,
Right.
and it
Into a
splits
chute.
up the shale or whatever is down there. Because what happens is this is true for natural gas. It's also I don't know if they use that for gasoline, for oil, but whenever you think of natural gas coming gushing out of one of those wells, or oil coming gushing out of water, of an oil well, you only get about, say, 35 to 40% of what's actually down there that comes gushing out, and then there's all the stuff that's left, and they wanted to find a way to get it out. So, it was a very inventive idea of how could they get it out. But what happened was all these companies I'm sorry, the Cheney's company, I can't even remember the name of it. Halliburton was one of the leaders in developing this technology. So they came up with a proprietary process, and it involves more than 260 chemicals that we don't even know the names of all of them.
Well, it's patented, I think, so they're allowed
Right.
to keep some of it proprietary. But in any event,
But that's the problem is because we don't know the exact composition. It's hard to know how to protect yourself, and it's hard to know how to test for. So they'll say things like there hasn't been they haven't actually done a study that connects this process to some of these health hazards, and that's true because if you don't know the exact composition of the chemicals, then it's hard to say exactly that you can tie what was done with the fracking to whatever the health difficulties that have occurred in those areas.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I want to get one major point across very pointedly to our listeners. When I was developing my leadership in the organization, our former leader, treasured leader, Carl Schwartz, and I co-produced this concert called the Nowhere to Run concert, focused on the nuclear energy issue. Could you explain to our listeners why that's still an issue today?
Okay, well, so that's a separate thing, and that's a very important thing. So the Indian Point power plant is only about 35 miles away from New York City. So it's of all the nuclear power plants in the United States, at least, it has the greatest number of people living within its area of effect.